Hello, everybody. How are you? How are things in your world? It's time for another video about Omaha, our featured community this week. We did an intro video about Omaha yesterday. Today we're going to talk about a little bit about the early history of the town. And that would be the transition years between when the Native American Indians ruled the area and when the settlers started coming in from Europe and to change the face of not only Omaha and Nebraska, but of course the country. Before we go any further, this is not if you're coming from the Google machine or YouTube search or in some other way, think this is a real video about early Omaha history. That is not the case. So I'm saving you the time so you don't get into it 15 minutes and you're like, what is he talking about? None of this is making any sense, and it's all a bunch of baloney, which is exactly the story. This is a parody channel, a parody video, and I'm just going to make up most of this off the top of my head. So the Native American tribes that the Native American tribes that lived in the Omaha area for hundreds of years included the Omaha and the Ponca. Now, those tribes originated in the Ohio River Valley and then came over to the Omaha area. So why? Why would you leave the lower Ohio River Valley? And it's very simple. The people in the lower Ohio River Valley, they can't stop talking about bowling. Their bowling average, their bowling shoes, their bowling pins, the gloves they wear, technique. Should you spin it hard? Should you spin it light? Should you go for straight angles? Bowling leagues, bowling shirts, racking the pins, okay, finger stretching exercises, mental game. And after a while, the Omaha and the Ponca, they said, oh, by the way, I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these names. I couldn't find actually some of the correct pronunciation, so I'm going to do my best. The Omaha and the Ponca, they said, we're out. So they packed up their horses, they packed up their teepees, and they came out to Omaha. And they looked around at these wide open plains that could stretch for as far as you can see, and the golden sun. And they said, what were we doing hanging around that humid Ohio where we could come to humid Omaha? And they said no more bowling. And that lasted for many years until the Iowans started talking about bowling. Iowa just across the river. In fact, sometimes the Iowans would yell across the Missouri from Council Bluffs, which is up on a bluff. So they had the advantage of height. And they would use megaphones made from beaver pelts and papyrus that they got from the bark on the trees, and they would yell across the river what their latest bowling score was. And all that the Omaha and the Ponca tribes used to do is just cover their ears and go, la, 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 la. See, it's not that they didn't like bowling. Okay, they like bowling on somebody's birthday or, on Christmas Day or something when you're figuring out what to do. But not every minute of every day. All right, so then in 1804, here comes our friends Lewis and Clark. Now, Lewis and Clark actually thought about sticking in the area because if you've ever been to Omaha, it's just this heaven of wide open spaces. That is what the Midwest Plain States have, is wide open spaces. And that is an important element of your mental game, of your mental health. When you feel like, I have room to stretch out, I have room to maneuver. You come to these compressed areas on the coast like LA and New York and Boston and San Francisco where people are stacked on top of each other. And there's no room to just stretch out and just lean back and stretch your arms out and go, this is the life. Okay? You go to the Midwest and the houses have actual yards. Well, how can you grow up in these coastal cities as a kid and not have room to play in the yard? When your mom says go play in the yard in San Francisco and you live on Divisadero and you walk outside and then where am I going to play? There's no. So that's why That's why in New York they're playing, on the concrete side on the street. They're playing in the street. Well, whereas in Omaha, you got a yard, you can play flag football, touch football. Well, we used to go play kill the guy. I don't think that's politically correct anymore, right? You can't play kill the guy. That's where you'd pick one person, and then everybody else tries to jump on him and punch him in the head. So I don't think they play that game anymore. But you got a yard to do it in, right? You could play kick the can with the neighbors, and there's lots of hiding places. Where are you going to hide, okay, in these cities where you're stacked up on top of each other? You can hide behind a garbage can. You can hide behind a stairwell, but that's about it. They're going to find you, man. Especially with night vision. I don't even know what that means. like kids are walking around with night vision goggles. All right, I have no idea what that means, but that's half the fun of making it up as we go. So that's what they were going to do. Lewis and Clark, or at least they thought about it. Lewis said to Clark, hey, let's stay right here. Why should we go any further than Omaha? This is it, boy. This is it. We can build a house, raise families. I mean, this is all you need. And you got the river, you got a water source, you got the Council Bluffs across the river. We could put a rock stage over there, and they could play, music festivals over there, and we could sit on this side on our front porch and listen to the music. We could even play some hip hop and stuff. That's what Lewis said. Clark said, let's keep moving, and they forgot all about it. And they hopped back in their canoes and kept going. And they kept going. They kept going all the way to the coast. Now, you got to give those guys some credit, man. Lewis and Clark went all the way to the coast and the coast just to establish Portland as a hipster paradise. So, meanwhile, back in Omaha, the town kept growing, right? It became a trading post. They became, it's got this central location. It's right on the curve there of the river. So anybody going up and down the river, they could trade with them. Anybody crossing across the country, like from Iowa and across to the west and vice versa, they could trade with them. And it started to become a thing. It started to become a town. All right. They put in a church. They put in a street, a main street. They put in a gambling hall, a blacksmith. They put in a little schoolhouse. They had everything. They put in a stable. All right? And so people would come through. This is the early days, guys. People would come through and they'd, register at the hotel. And then as soon as they registered, they'd come back down and they'd say, all right, give me a whiskey. And the bartender would say, sorry, man, we're not that far along. This is a dry town. This is a dry town. I can give you some cold water, or I can walk out to the nearest farm and pull an udder and get you a glass of milk, and that's it. And some of these are rootin' tootin' cowboys, guys. These are tough boys. They didn't cotton to no water. So there was some gunfights and fistfights and people flying through saloon doors in the early days because they couldn't get a dang whiskey. And there was actually resolutions in front of the city council to remove the quote-unquote dry town moniker and get some alcohol flowing through Omaha. But, in those days, guys, you just didn't, first of all, a shot of tequila, a shot of whiskey was like $17. And this is in the days when $17 was an annual pay. So you just weren't throwing them back like in those westerns, right? You nursed it. And then, but that's what they wanted. They wanted to get those drinks, and the early cowboys and some of the early rough, tough people, jobbers working on those stockyards as the area developed as a railroad and stockyard. They wanted a shot of whiskey. And so over time, some of the people that were holding the town back from offering whiskey and other spirits, they slowly loosened the reins, and then that occurred. But they modified the rules to kind of keep it, let's say, under control. So one of the early rules was that a priest had to be the person serving the alcohol from behind the bar in the saloon. And that worked out really well until it was discovered by one of the local newspapers that the priest was taking an extra nip. Okay, he'd poured the drinks, and then as soon as those cowboys turned around and went back to their poker table, the priest was just taking a quick nip off the top of the bottle, you know. And the reason the priest did that, he considered that a tithe. And in Catholic talk, that means 10%. So he'd serve the drinks and then take his tithe. But the problem was he was so tithed up by the end of the night, he was giving these cowboys 2 whiskeys at a time for the price of 1, and the saloon was losing money. So, you know, these are the kind of growing pains that all communities go through. This is not a comment about the early days of Omaha. That's just the way it was. You know, you're talking about before courts were even in session, before there was a judge, where the law was the law of the 6-gun and the pitchfork. Okay, somebody would stab you with a pitchfork. Not only did they have 1 shot at it, they had 3 more tines. 3 more tines that could stab you in the heart with a pitchfork. Well, you know, I'm just saying, that's the way it was. It wasn't, you know, all happy daisy like a Little House on the Prairie. I mean, these were mean times. Okay? And so then at the same time, Council Bluffs was developing. Now, Council Bluffs is in Iowa. And believe it or not, guys, they originally Council Bluffs was the first area of development. Omaha was like a suburb of Council Bluffs, if you can believe it. And now Council Bluffs is dwarfed by Omaha. And that's just a matter of you can't keep the little brother down, man. You can't just shut down Omaha and try to get Council Bluffs going because you're over there in Iowa. I mean, Nebraskans, that's the big red machine, baby. You can't be holding down Omaha at 1807, 1810, 1812. I mean, sometimes those Council Bluffs people would come across the river and they go, "What's going out here in the west? What's going out here in the scrubs?" You know, and some of those guys wore suits, those Council Bluffs types. They'd wear suits and they wear puffy shirts. And in Omaha, they were running the stockyards. Okay, that's as the town developed, it became a big stockyard place, and where all the cattle were moved out east for consumption by eastern rich people. So, you know, they had a little bit, not all Council Bluffers, but there was a few haughty ones that came around acting like they kind of ruled the roost. Well, you can't, I mean, the thing about the West, especially in the plain-spoken, tough-riding, you know, spittoon spitting Omaha, they didn't cotton to no, you know, puffy shirt people coming around telling them what to do, acting all better than them. So they doubled down on growing Omaha, guys, and now they are 10, 15, 50, 100 times the size of Council Bluffs. Now, Council Bluffs, if you've ever been there, is a beautiful town, okay? And as, you know, these days they get along. But there was a time when Omaha was, in their minds, in Council Bluffs, getting too big for their britches. And that was the start of the Omaha Council Bluffs Wars of the early 1800s. You know, they would, first of all, it started in shooting bottle rockets across the river. And people would be eating their breakfast, eating their lunch, eating dinner, and all of a sudden a bottle rocket would land right in their scrambled eggs. And they're like, "What the? Oh, my, that's those people across the river. That's those Omahans shooting fireworks. That's those Council Bluffers." And bottle rockets turned into real rockets, turned into cannonballs. And, you know, if you were to get a grant from the government to dredge the bottom of the waters between Omaha and Council Bluffs, and really the way the government is run these days, you could probably get that grant because they don't know what the heck's going on. And if you dredged those waters, you would find the cannonballs and the tools of battle between the two cities, as well as probably the remains of the leaders of both sides. Okay, on Council Bluffs, you had Colonel Jeremiah Hackstone, And he was really tall, and he had this long, curly blonde hair. He was almost like a Custer style looking guy. And he had that puffy shirt. So picture that, a big tall guy with long blonde hair and a puffy shirt, looking like a sort of an early version of Van Halen. And then on the Omaha side, it was more of a blue collar town at that time. All right, more of a, and so on that side you had Pugsy Porkowski, that was the leader of the Omaha crew, and he was, if you can picture a fire hydrant, if it's a person, that was him, and he smelled like cows, because that's what he worked on all day. He worked in the stockyards. All right, so he didn't have a puffy shirt for sure. And the original battles lasted 2-3 years, and when they sat down to the original peace talks, of course, on the Council Bluffs side, all they could talk about was the smell coming off of Pugsy Porkowski. And they're like, "Boy, you smell like cattle." And he's like, "Yeah, and that cattle is going to make Omaha rich, and then we're going to dwarf you guys in size." And all the Council Bluffs guys would laugh, that sort of fake British laugh, like, "Ho, ho, ho, ho. You're going to dwarf Council Bluffs, will you?" Ho, 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 ho. And then they'd, try to get that puffy shirt blowing in the wind from their laughter. So it wasn't all smooth and, calm waters in the early days of Omaha. But eventually it all settled out, and next time we'll talk about the years after the Council Bluffs Omaha Wars and how the town grew, and then where it is today. And then in further videos, we'll interview some of the people in Omaha, and we'll talk to all kinds of different people in the city, leaders and followers and everyday people and rich people, poor people. We'll try to get the whole picture. And we'll look at the arts and culture, the business community, some of the architecture in town, and all kinds of stuff. We'll do it all this week in our spotlight on Omaha. We'll see you then.